Welcome back to Les Schwab Tire Center's Outdoor GPS, presented by Fisherman's Marine and Outdoor. Now it's time for your weekend tech tip, brought to you by Chevy Silverado.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're in the midst of the Chevy Silverado Tech Tip of the Week, and I've got a couple of segments that I can go through. Actually, I got quite a bit of time. But if you'd like to join in, maybe you've got a recommendation, maybe you have something that you would like others to know about, call us up on that. I'm going to get there, Ryan, I promise. North American Metals Hotline is 503-548-6777. If you have questions or comments about this, this is the time to jump in now. So that we can help out. Okay, so the question that we got, this is from one of our Facebook viewers or Facebook fans, whatever you call it, likers, whatever, I don't know, social media stuff, was what are the two rod and reel combos that you like to carry in when you go winter steelhead fishing? Now, the vast majority of people that chase winter steelhead here in the Northwest, they're bank fishermen. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't a whole bunch, as you all know, a whole bunch of drift boats out there and in the right river systems, like myself, jet boaters that are going to be out if the conditions let you do that and you're, again, in the right system. So I'm going to kind of answer it that way, although I will say that both these rods, whenever I jump in a drift boat, are in there, except this one, just because it's so long. We'll talk about it in just a second. But when I'm on the bank, so I'm going to address that question specifically. We talked about this rod last week because we got a similar question, but we're going to expand on this. It's the 1065-2. This is the edge rod, the 10 to 20. Thank goodness that I've got some really good steelhead fishermen friends that found this, Mr. Fish Killer himself, years ago. We started using this rod years ago. Because it's that 10 to 20 rating, and when you're bobber dogging, especially from the bank, you're picking up a ton of line, right? It depends on where you're at and the situation you're in, how many people are around, right, where you can get away with it. We're not scared of dumping line with a rod like this. Now, if you've got a 4 to 10 or 6 to 12, 10 to 6 rod, and you got a whole bunch of line out there, you set the hook or try to mend, you got a lot of line you got to move, and you're going to get a lot of rod bend in there. Biggest problem is when that bobber ultimately does go, and you got it down there quite a ways, you need to be able to get from here to here and get that hook positioned. I mean, it's a huge, I mean, how many times, especially when we're using lighter rods, where you set the hook and you haven't even moved the bobber, okay? You need a rod that's got enough backbone in order to move all that line and get that bobber moved. Now, that's also one of the reasons why I pretty much exclusively fish a fixed float bobber dogging when I'm on the bank or in a drift boat. When I'm in my power boat, we've talked about this before, that I like to run sliders in that situation, but again, that's a different discussion for a different day. So with fixed floats, with a 10-6 rod, yeah, you can really get that line moving. You got a ton of power, and it is arguably the absolute perfect setup. If somebody were to ask me, which one would you keep if you can only have one? And we're going to talk about my other favorite rod here in a second. I would probably say the 10-6 just because of the versatility of it, okay? This other one I'm going to show you that I was exposed to last year, again, Mr. Freddie, who is just an absolute diving into information, okay? Had discovered the Silver Widow. This is an 11'4". It's the 1143-2. It's a 6 to 15 rating. Now you're gonna go, well, you just were talking about a 10 to 20, and now you got a 6 to 15. What do you? This rod at the 11'4" length actually has as much backbone in this back section as this 10-6, 10 to 20. It's in that extra length in the front half that you get that little bit more bend in the rod, but I can still set the hook with this 11'4" from a mile away and just absolutely be, it's like a weapon. You get that line up off the line so fast, or off the water so fast, I'm moving that bobber as long as I have my mend correctly, as long as I have my line the way it's supposed to be when you're fishing these things correctly, I'm setting the hook. It doesn't matter how far this thing is, I got enough backbone in this rod to set the hook and get that hook placed, which is a big deal. And I absolutely love this rod. At 11'4", you're going to go, my God, that's a long rod. And you would not be wrong. It is not friendly to use in a drift boat. You know, if it's yourself and one other person, or if you're solo, it's not a big deal. But if you've got more than a couple of rods in the boat, it just gets in the way. As We all know, especially if somebody behind you, the guy on the sticks or somebody in the back of the boat hooks one and it goes around the front of the boat, things can get a little bit hectic in a hurry. And when you're talking about an edge rod, you simply don't want anything smacking it, right? They're artwork, quite honestly, especially the Silver Widow. I mean, look how pretty that is. That's all hand-laid graphite. I mean, just like the Black Widow, but it is just, they're amazing rods. In the end, I love the length of this rod because I can pick up so much line. It doesn't weigh a thing, but there is a trade-off. You have so much rod out in front of your hand that it does take a little bit of time to get used to how you're going to pick that line up and how you're going to set the hook when the bobber does ultimately go down. Now, casting-wise, you can cast this thing a mile. I can definitely cast it further than I can the 10-6, and that's, of course, in the rod length itself. So there's an advantage, because again, it depends on the system that you're in the area that you're at, how far casts you need to make. In a perfect world, you don't have to make long casts, but there are times when making a cast to the other side of the river is the difference between getting bit or not. Again, you've all been there. So the 11-4, it is so close. Of course, they're both matched up with 4,000 size reels. They're both loaded up with the exact same line, 40-pound. This is the P-line TCB braid. This is the braid 8. I have not gotten any of their new version of braided line where it does not fade, so I don't have any experience with that yet. Supposedly I've got some of that coming, but this is what all my reels are loaded up with right now in 40-pound. I like the 40-pound because it floats better. 30-pound these days is so thin that you're really starting to get into the situation where that line might want to get underneath the surface, and you don't want that. You want that line to stay on the surface as best you can so that when you do set the hook or mend your line, it's easier to pick it up. It makes a huge difference, especially when you're trying to get that hook into the corner of a fish's mouth, especially when you're bead fishing like what these two rods are set up like. So 40-pound, size 4,000 reels, and some of you are going to go, well, why in the world do you have such a big reel? It's not that big. The difference between a 3,000 and a 4,000 is that spool size. So now I've got more line that I can dump, and it makes the reel faster. No matter what the gear ratio is, if you've got a larger spool, you're going to pick up more line on each rotation. Now, you've heard me say this for 100 years. That Revo Rocket with the I think it's 7-1 in the spinning reel version, 10-1 in the bait caster, speed is key, especially when you're fishing bobber and bees, bobber and jig. You want to get your gear back as quickly as you can so that you can make another cast. You might not think it's a very big deal, but in the big picture of things, if you can get a few more casts in a spot, especially if you're drifting by, it's an advantage, and you might have that other opportunity to get bit where others may not because they're still screwing around with an older or whatever version 5-1 reel. So something that's fast. This is a 6-1. I like the 7-1 too. It all just depends on what you have, but I like the larger size. It also will balance out a rod that's this long, a 10-6 or an 11-4. It's not much heavier than, say, a size 3,000, because typically the reels themselves are the same. The body size are the same. They just change that spool size, right? So it's not that it's that much heavier. It's just more appropriate for a rod this long, but also these rods are super light. You can take competitor rods, and if you've watched the show for 16 years, I've literally had all of them. You have rods in the same length as this, as an edge, they're at least half as heavy, half again as heavy as an edge rod. There's a huge difference on how long you're willing to hold on to one of those things all day long, because you will start to notice it in your arm as you're fishing. So that was strictly to answer the question from our Facebook fan, what two rods I like to carry when I go in. Now, what I think will be interesting for some is I'm not carrying a jig rod and a bead rod anymore. I'm actually carrying two bead rods, but they're different beads, and you can fish them very differently. So we'll have that when we come back in this break. And I've got Al from Malala and a couple others calling in, but this one is beginner steelhead fishing recommendation. Not sure exactly where that's going to go, but we'll find out together when we come back from this break for more Outdoor GPS. We'll be right back.
Outdoor GPS is brought to you by Chevy Silverado and the impressive Turbo Max engine. Flex your muscle with the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever. Official truck of Outdoor GPS.